Hey guys, tonight we're unwrapping a story stickier than a melted Tootsie Roll at the bottom of your childhood pillowcase. We're diving into the bizarre, alarming, and teeth-rattling history of Halloween candy and how it once teetered on the edge of mass destruction for an entire generation. No, this isn't a PSA about brushing your teeth, though you probably should, and it's not just a nostalgic trip back to plastic pumpkin buckets and the subtle thrill of finding a full-sized Snickers. This is about real danger. Razor blades, poisoned pixie sticks, panic on the evening news, and why parents started inspecting fun-sized treats like they were ancient artifacts cursed by a dentist. Before we unleash this sugar-fueled conspiracy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy these historical bedtime ramblings. Leave a comment telling me your favorite Halloween candy, or which one you'd instantly throw away because it looked tampered with. Candy corn, you're not fooling anyone. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that white noise, and get as comfortable as possible. So let's ask some questions that have haunted every candy-loving soul. Was your childhood really that dangerous? Did people genuinely hide razor blades in apples? Or was this just a boomer fever dream? How did a generation survive the annual ritual of walking dark suburban streets, begging strangers for sugar, and then immediately assuming your neighbors were trying to kill you? Were parents really out here X-raying candy like it was contraband uranium? And what happens when society collectively panics over something as harmless as a mini Milky Way? Congratulations. You've just woken up in the 1970s America, where everything is brown, the economy is shaky, your costume is almost certainly flammable, and every bite of candy might be your last. Good luck. Picture it. The suburbs, 1974. Shag carpeting, wood-paneled station wagons, and a creeping sense that your neighbor is up to something. Halloween used to be about harmless fun, until suddenly, every treat was a ticking time bomb, and your parents acted like Willy Wonka had a side hustle as a supervillain. Let's set the scene. It's late October, and the air smells like burning leaves and suspicious parental anxiety. You're 8 years old, dressed as a skeleton in a costume that consists of a plastic smock and a mask with elastic so tight it could cut off circulation to your future regrets. The sun is setting. Porch lights flicker on. Jack-o'-lanterns leer from every doorstep, grinning with that classic combination of whimsy and subtle threat. But something's off. The mood has shifted. You sense it in the way your parents keep glancing at the clock and locking eyes over the casserole at dinner. Last year, they waved you out the door with a flashlight and a casual "don't trip." This year, they're acting like you're walking into the first 10 minutes of a horror movie. There's a neighbor across the street you've known since you were in diapers, Mrs. Greeley, queen of caramel apples and unsolicited hugs. Tonight, she's eyeing your mom with suspicion, clutching her own trick-or-treat bowl like she's guarding state secrets. What happened? Blame it on the news. In 1974, Halloween safety became the lead story. Anchors in plaid blazers warned of tainted candy and foreign objects hidden in sweets. Suddenly, every bite of chocolate was suspect, and every unwrapped treat was one step away from being evidence in a cold case. The razor blade in the apple, maybe it happened once, maybe it didn't. But it didn't matter. The fear went viral before viral was even a thing. You notice new house rules. Rule number 1. No eating candy until it's been inspected. Rule number 2. Anything homemade, unwrapped, or even slightly weird-looking gets tossed straight into the trash, no questions asked. Your mom is now running the kitchen like a forensic laboratory. She's poking through your loot pile with a paring knife and a frown, dissecting Tootsie Rolls like a pathologist. Your dad is there for moral support, occasionally holding up a box of Milk Duds to the light, as if he's expecting to find uranium. You watch in horror as your favorite treats disappear, popcorn balls, cookies shaped like pumpkins, That mysterious homemade fudge misses, Greeley always made with a secret ingredient. Spoiler, it was marshmallow fluff and hope. Into the trash they go, accompanied by the phrase that will haunt your dreams for years. Better safe than sorry. If you're really lucky, you get to keep the wrapped stuff. But even then, your parents squint at every candy bar as if it might suddenly sprout fangs. Outside, the neighborhood has changed. Parents are patrolling the sidewalks with flashlights, exchanging stories of something that happened in a town 3 states away. Trick-or-treating becomes less of a sprint and more of a slow, nervous migration from porch to porch. You try to focus on the fun, ghost decorations, the crunch of leaves, the crinkle of your loot bag, but you can't shake the feeling that the world has gotten just a little bit darker, a little less sweet. And for the first time, you see your parents as human. Not just grown-ups who pay bills and forget to buy batteries, but people who are scared too. They want to protect you from the monsters, real or imagined. Even if it means sacrificing a perfectly good popcorn ball. Later that night, after the inspections, the negotiations, and the ceremonial trashing of half your haul, you find yourself in bed, staring at the ceiling. The air still smells like sugar and smoke. You wonder if the world will ever go back to the way it was, before the fear, before the X-rays, before the long shadow of suspicion fell across your favorite night. But you survived. You lost your sweet tooth, maybe, but you gained a new one for skepticism and an appreciation for every tiny wrapped miracle that survived the purge. And somewhere out there, Mrs. Greeley is still making caramel apples, still hoping that next year, trust will return along with the kids. You're dressed as a plastic masked monster, clutching a pillowcase. The rules are simple. Collect as much candy as humanly possible. Avoid houses with the porch light off. And, starting this year, maybe check your candy for deadly weapons before eating it. Welcome to the Gauntlet. You're a contestant tonight on the world's longest-running reality competition, Trick or Treat. The year is 1977. Your costume is an all-polyester robot suit that smells like new shower curtain, complete with a mask that turns your breath into its own weather system. The rules are simple, the risks are high, and the grand prize is as much questionable candy as you can stuff into a pillowcase without tearing the seams. Your competitors are everywhere, kids from down the street, your cousin in a bedsheet ghost, that one kid who always shows up in the same tattered Dracula cape every year, now held together by Scotch tape and willpower. The course is the suburban neighborhood after dark. The yards are littered with rakes, hoses, and the occasional dog landmine. Streetlights flicker like the start of a horror film, and somewhere in the distance, you hear the shrieks of sugar-hyped children echoing through the night air. You begin at the starting line, your own front door. Your parents send you out with a flashlight and the warning, "Don't eat anything until we check it." As if you're heading off to storm Normandy instead of Mr. Murphy's front porch. You nod solemnly. You're on a mission. Every house is a potential jackpot or a total bust. The houses with orange lights and fake cobwebs, safe bets. The ones with the porch lights off, probably hiding from society, or worse, handing out raisins. You form alliances along the way. Safety in numbers, your parents say. But you know the real reason. More kids means more candy to trade later, and a slightly better chance someone else will step in something unfortunate first. You move in a loose, semi-organized mob, checking each other's costumes, swapping rumors about who's giving out full-sized Snickers, and carefully avoiding the house with the weird old man and the poodle. Every time a door opens, there's a moment of suspense. You blurt out, "Trick or treat," with a smile so big it almost cracks your mask. Behind every door is a potential game show host, ready to judge your costume and decide your fate. Some are generous, tossing handfuls of candy into your bag like you're the winner on a cash tornado. Others hold out a single, forlorn butterscotch disc, as if performing a public service. The bold ones ask you to do a trick, sing a song, tell a joke, act like a chicken. You perform because candy is on the line and you have no dignity left anyway. The night is filled with hazards. There's the steep driveway that becomes a slip and slide in the dark. There's the lawn you swear is haunted by garden gnomes, one of whom you're pretty sure just blinked. There's the porch step you misjudge, sending you tumbling and scattering candy everywhere. But you recover, because the clock is ticking. Everyone knows the best candy goes fast. You power walk from house to house, adrenaline mixing with high fructose corn syrup, determined to hit every door before curfew. There's the unspoken code of honor. Never double back to a house for a second round, unless they're giving out king-size bars, in which case all bets are off. You keep an eye on your haul, always weighing your bag in your hand, mentally calculating whether you've reached legendary status or just decent year territory. There's the ritual of mid-route trades with your friends, swapping a pile of Tootsie Rolls for a single Reese's cup, arguing the exchange rate of sweet tarts to milk duds like Wall Street traders. But looming over all this is the new sense of danger. You're not just dodging the dark or neighborhood dogs, you're dodging possible sabotage, tampered treats, or the dreaded loose-wrapped butterscotch, eyed by every parent with the suspicion of a trained CIA agent. Still, you press on, because despite the paranoia, the warnings, the flashlight that keeps dying, this is your night, the one night of the year when you roam free, masters of the suburban landscape, united in the pursuit of sugar-fueled glory. By the end of the night, you return home victorious, pillowcase heavy, mask stuck to your face, exhausted and triumphant. You survived the original survival game show, Trick or Treat. Your prize, a mountain of candy, 1,000 stories, and a lifetime fear of butterscotch. It's 1978. You can barely breathe inside your Kmart Dracula suit, which is basically a garbage bag with armholes. But the real fear isn't suffocating. It's that every chocolate bar now comes with a side of existential dread. It's 1978. You can barely breathe inside your Kmart Dracula suit, which is basically a garbage bag with armholes. But the real fear isn't suffocating. It's that every chocolate bar now comes with a side of existential dread. You pull the rubber band tight behind your head, praying it doesn't snap and take your eye out. The mask itself is a masterpiece of the 1970s child safety. Sharp, edged, barely ventilated, and coated in enough petrochemical perfume to knock out a small horse. Your field of vision is limited to a 4-degree cone, meaning every step is a leap of faith. The mouth hole is so tiny that by the end of the night, your chin will be redder than the fake blood on your collar. Your breath fogs the inside, turning the mask into its own tiny greenhouse, one where the main crop is regret. Outside, your mother zips up your cape, a black sheet that doubles as a suffocation hazard. She gives you last-minute instructions, all delivered with the seriousness of a flight attendant demonstrating emergency exits. Don't run, don't go near the street, and don't eat anything until I check it, even if it's wrapped. You nod, but the real threat isn't crossing the street. It's tripping over your own shoe in a costume that squeaks with every movement like a mouse convention. You head out, plastic pumpkin in hand, costume already riding up in places that should not be ridden. The wind howls. Your plastic fangs dig into your gums. You're sweating but somehow still shivering. You wonder if your costume will make it home in one piece, or if you'll lose an arm to a rogue staple holding the whole thing together. You pass other kids similarly attired, tiny witches, superheroes, cowboys, and at least 3 ghosts made from bed sheets that probably weren't washed first. Halfway down the block, disaster strikes. A plastic boot cover slips, sending you skidding across the sidewalk like a budget action hero. You get up, dignity slightly injured, but candy bucket intact. In the distance, you hear someone else crying, the universal sound of a costume failing under the weight of ambition and elementary school engineering. But let's be honest. The real danger tonight isn't wardrobe malfunction. It's what happens after the haul, because for the first time, you notice your parents treating your Halloween loot like evidence in a criminal trial. The living room turns into a crime scene investigation. Wrapped candy is dissected, sniffed, and even broken in half with surgical precision. Anything that looks homemade, goodbye. Anything with a wrapper that's slightly loose, gone. Apples are held up to the light and turned slowly, as if your parents expect to see a glowing neon danger sign inside. You sneak a glance at your loot pile. Gone are the days when you could eat whatever you wanted. Now, you watch as your favorite items disappear into the trash. Caramel apples, popcorn balls, cookies, mysterious fudge from Mrs. Jensen down the street. Your father shakes his head solemnly. Better safe than sorry. The phrase echoes through your head like a new curse word. You glance at your reflection in the TV screen. Plastic mask, half off, face shiny with sweat. A single fun-size Snickers in your hand. You're not sure which is more likely to take you out at this point, the candy or your costume. You imagine the headlines. Child suffocates in plastic mask after surviving toxic milk dud scare. It's not the heroic exit you'd planned. But here's the secret. The danger, real or imagined, can't quite dim the thrill. There's a kind of magic in surviving the gauntlet of cheap costumes, neighborly paranoia, and candy inspections. You've learned to be cautious, but you haven't lost your excitement. You eat your approved candy under your blanket, costume shed, and abandoned on the floor, feeling a weird mix of pride and relief. You survived another Halloween, plastic mask, parental inquisition, existential dread, and all. Not bad for a kid in a garbage bag. Sleep well, little Dracula. You earned it. You've survived polyester costumes and the night-long sugar chase, but you're not out of the woods yet. It's the 1970s, and somewhere in America, a news anchor is warning everyone about razor blades in apples. Suddenly, your whole generation's relationship with fruit and trust has been changed forever. It starts with a whisper. Maybe your cousin's friend's uncle heard about a kid 2 towns over who bit into a Granny Smith and wound up in the hospital. Or maybe you caught your parents whispering nervously after the 6 o'clock news. Either way, the story grows faster than a fungus on a week-old jack-o'-lantern. The next morning, everyone at school is buzzing. Did you hear? Someone got a razor blade in their apple. It doesn't matter that nobody knows the actual victim. Details are fuzzy, but the terror is crystal clear. You never liked apples on Halloween anyway, but now they're elevated to nuclear threat status. Suddenly, every shiny red fruit in your bag is suspect, each one a potential booby trap. You hold them gingerly, like ticking bombs, certain you can almost see a glint of metal lurking under the skin. Your parents, once delighted by the rare treat of a caramel apple, now inspect them with the seriousness of bomb disposal experts. The kitchen counter becomes a scene out of CSI, Granny Smith edition. By now, local news has gotten wind of the panic. Anchors with gravity-defying hair and serious voices stare into the camera and urge vigilance. Police chiefs offer somber advice about checking all candy for foreign objects, as if everyone in your neighborhood has joined a secret society of evil dental hygienists. The only people enjoying this are the local dentists, who are delighted to have a new excuse to lecture about the dangers of apples and maybe pick up a few new clients along the way. The results are immediate and far-reaching. Your parents' suspicion now expands beyond apples. Oranges, pears, even bananas are regarded with side-eye. Anything not hermetically sealed by a multinational candy conglomerate is treated like evidence from a crime scene. Homemade popcorn balls, landmines, brownie bites from Mrs. Jenkins, outlawed. Even the humble homemade cookie becomes a weapon of mass destruction. If it's not factory wrapped in cellophane, and certified by 3 federal agencies, it's going straight in the trash. You start to see it everywhere. The neighborhood association issues an official letter: do not accept unwrapped treats. The principal announces over the crackly PA that all fruit gifts should be turned in to the front office for inspection. There are whispers about people taking their candy to the hospital for an X-ray. You imagine a waiting room full of kids in Batman pajamas clutching pillowcases of loot while radiology techs scan for hidden danger like a Halloween episode of Cops. Of course, there's a dirty secret to all this. The number of real, documented cases of Halloween razor blade sabotage is vanishingly small, fewer than the number of kids who actually like licorice. Most of the reported incidents turn out to be hoaxes or kids pranking their own parents. But no one is interested in the facts. The legend is scarier, and scarier is more fun, especially for adults who need a reason to take your candy away. The panic becomes tradition. Parents who grew up trusting their neighbors now eye each other over the fence, united only by mutual suspicion and the faint hope that someone else will be brave enough to eat the caramel apple first. Neighborhoods set up safe house lists and block parties, designed to protect kids from the perils of rogue apples and suburban malice. But even as the panic grows, something else happens. You learn to adapt. You trade fruit for chocolate, develop an allergy to anything unwrapped, and perfect your suspicious glare. You survive the great razor blade panic with your teeth, mostly intact, and a growing sense that sometimes the scariest thing about Halloween isn't the monsters or the dark, it's what grown-ups are willing to believe. So you sleep a little lighter tonight, but you sleep with your fun-sized Snickers close by, because at least you know what's inside. You know what's scarier than finding a worm in your apple? Your mum taking a magnifying glass to every fruit in your trick-or-treat bag, convinced that the real treat is tetanus. You never asked for fruit on Halloween. No one did. You wanted candy, pure, unregulated, high-fructose corn syrup in fun-sized bars that rattled at the bottom of your plastic pumpkin. But there was always that one house, usually run by someone who wore walking shoes and had a secret agenda to raise neighborhood dental hygiene, who insisted on giving out apples. Sometimes they'd even smile as they dropped one into your bag, as if bestowing a priceless gift. The only thing worse was a toothbrush. Back in the day, apples had a wholesome reputation. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. Or so you were told by grown-ups, who clearly hadn't spent a night bartering for Snickers. But in the post-razor blade panic era, apples transformed overnight from health food to weaponized produce. Gone was the innocent image of a crisp red delicious. Now, every apple you received on Halloween was treated like a ticking time bomb. You remember that feeling of dread as you watched the apple plop into your haul. It landed with a dull, accusing thud. You'd smile, because you were polite, and you'd been trained to thank adults for any treat. But inside, you were already plotting how to offload this red orb of obligation as soon as possible. Maybe you'd forget it at your friend's house. Maybe it would accidentally roll under the car seat and never be seen again. If you were bold, you'd simply hand it to your little sibling and watch what happened next, an early lesson in plausible deniability. But you couldn't just get rid of it quietly anymore. Not in the age of suspicion. The moment you got home, your parents would intercept the apple with the urgency of bomb squad specialists. It didn't matter if it had a shiny sticker from the grocery store or was hand-picked from Mrs. Kravitz's backyard tree. Every apple faced a full cross-examination. Visual inspection for pinholes, awkward rolling between thumb and forefinger, and sometimes, yes, the ceremonial cutting in half, just in case a blade was hiding at the core like the world's worst prize. Meanwhile, you watched with morbid curiosity as your dad rotated the apple under the kitchen light. "You can never be too careful," he'd say, as if he'd ever once worried about produce before this exact moment. The tension would build, and for a split second, You wondered if your neighbor really was out to get you. After all, she had strong opinions about loud music and the state of your front yard. Of course, if the apple survived inspection, it was placed carefully back in the fruit bowl, where it would spend the next month aging into a soft, mottled mess that nobody, not even the dog, would dare touch. More often, though, it failed. Into the trash it went, unceremoniously dumped with the popcorn balls and mysterious baked goods. Better safe than sorry, your mom would mutter, like a refrain in a cult. You never saw a grown-up throw away a Snickers. At school, the apple panic became an open joke. Kids boasted about their escape tactics, flushing apples down the toilet, hiding them in mailboxes, trading them for a single pixie sticks just to be rid of them. By the end of the week, you couldn't remember a single kid who actually ate their Halloween apple. You'd hear rumors about one brave soul who did, but the next day he was mysteriously absent from class. Coincidence or a cautionary tale? No one wanted to find out. Looking back, the transformation of apples from snack to suspect is the real Halloween magic trick of your childhood. In the Great War on Candy, the apple lost decisively. It never stood a chance against the combined power of paranoia, media hysteria, and a nation's sweet tooth. Tonight, as you drift off, spare a moment for the humble apple. Once a symbol of health, now a casualty of Halloween's weirdest chapter. Sleep tight, and may all your treats be factory wrapped. Local news anchors are having the time of their lives. Reports of poisoned candy are everywhere, even though most victims just had a stomachache from eating 12 Charleston Chews before dinner. But logic has no place here. There are a few things you know for sure in the 1970s America. The station wagon will always smell like old French fries. Polyester is considered breathable, and if you turn on the news in late October, you're in for a fresh helping of panic. This is the era when every parent in America is convinced that the next pixie stick you eat could be your last. It doesn't matter that you can see the sugar inside the straw. It doesn't matter that it's sealed tighter than the lid on your grandmother's pickle jar. All it takes is one local news anchor, solemn in his plaid suit and wide tie, reading from the teleprompter about alarming reports of tainted Halloween candy, and suddenly, the pixie stick is rebranded from childhood delight to sugar-based death wish. The panic is pure, uncut, and available on every channel. Each segment features a parade of police chiefs, pediatricians, and concerned citizens who have never once attended a Halloween party but now have detailed opinions on candy safety. The phrase poisoned candy is repeated with the urgency of a tornado warning. It's the 11 o'clock news, and the whole country is now united in the belief that a mad scientist is out there, somewhere, with a personal vendetta against children and Wonka products. Your parents watch with the faces of people hearing about an asteroid heading for their exact address. They lean in, shaking their heads, clutching their mugs of Sanka as if coffee might offer protection. When the news anchor interviews a victim, usually a child who actually just ate too many sugar straws and got a tummy ache, it's delivered like the aftermath of a biblical plague. The symptoms: mild nausea, a sugar crash, and parents who will never trust a pixie stick again. You're caught in the crossfire. You love pixie sticks. They're the highlight of any candy haul. The one thing your sibling will trade away without a fight. The purest form of sugar you can legally obtain before age 18. You fantasize about eating 3 at once, pouring neon powder into your mouth until your tongue changes color and your brain achieves liftoff. But this year, your haul is under siege. The adults are out for answers. And your favorite candy is Exhibit A. Halloween night arrives, and you empty your bag onto the living room carpet. There they are. Glorious paper straws full of illicit powder, radiant as radioactive flares in a sea of chocolate mediocrity. But before you can make your move, your mum intercepts, wielding kitchen scissors like a pair of surgical shears. Hold on, I need to check these. The inspection is tense. Each pixie stick is held to the light, scrutinized for pinholes, leaks, or signs of tampering. Your dad reads the label aloud, as if artificial flavor might be a legal warning. And then comes the ultimate test. The one you can never win. Who gave you this? Your mum asks. You hesitate. Was it Mrs. Riley? Or was that the house with the wax lips? The interrogation ramps up. Was it the Smiths or the new people at the corner? As if you'd ever memorized the source of each candy in the holy chaos of trick-or-treating. If you can't provide an airtight alibi for your pixie stick, it's banished to the trash. No trial, no jury. One by one, your sugar dreams are crushed. The news coverage gets more elaborate every year. There are dramatic reenactments with ominous music and slow pans across bowls of innocent candy. Experts appear, offering vague advice and serious nods. You imagine a shadowy villain in a candy lab, cackling as he plots to turn your sugar rush into a national crisis. The reality? Most poisoned candy scares are urban legends or tragic, isolated cases blown up for ratings. But it's too late. The damage is done, so you lie in bed, craving neon sugar, the echo of the newsroom still in your ears. You survived another Halloween, but the pixie sticks did not. Sleep well, future skeptic. Tomorrow, the news will find something else to panic about. By the time the 1980s rolled around, Halloween was no longer just a parade of polyester ghosts and half-melted chocolate bars. It had become a full-on, nationwide exercise in medical-grade paranoia. The great American tradition of trust, but verify, reached its logical extreme when someone, somewhere, decided the best way to make sure your fun-sized candy wasn't filled with danger was to send it through an actual hospital X-ray machine. You're living in an age where technology is king. Your dad brags about the family's new VCR, which weighs more than you do. Your neighbor's cordless phone could double as a weapon, so why not bring the full force of modern science to bear on your Tootsie Rolls? It sounds a little ridiculous, until you find yourself standing in line at the local ER, pillowcase in hand, waiting for a radiologist to give your loot the all-clear. Hospitals all across the country get in on the act. Free X-ray for Halloween candy, the signs say, as if medical imaging was always meant for Skittles and Baby Ruths. Nurses and technicians smile, but behind their eyes is the exhausted glaze of people who'd rather be doing literally anything else. You're sandwiched between a princess with a light-up wand and a zombie with a pillowcase so heavy it might break the imaging table. Every few seconds, you hear the mechanical hum of another batch of Milky Ways and mini Twizzlers being zapped, just in case someone stashed a nail file where nougat should be. You feel both important and faintly embarrassed. Is your neighborhood really crawling with criminal masterminds stuffing metal objects into fun-size Three Musketeers? Or is your mum just determined to use every available tool to keep you from accidentally eating a rogue paperclip? You watch as your candy moves down the conveyor belt like a tiny, colorful luggage carousel, knowing you'll never look at a Snickers the same way again. At home, your parents treat the X-ray results like a medical diagnosis. The radiologist said your bag is clean, your dad announces, relief flooding his voice. We're safe this year. You wonder if next year you'll need a DNA test for your Butterfingers or a background check for every Tootsie Pop. The bar keeps moving higher. You imagine the local news anchors, solemn and triumphant. Once again, local hospitals save Halloween from certain doom. You half expect to see a heroic nurse on a parade float, waving a lead apron and scattering dum-dums to the crowd. It's not that anyone really believes there's a spike in criminal activity, but the ritual of X-raying candy quickly becomes part of the annual tradition. Right up there with carving pumpkins and regretting your costume choice before you even make it to the first house. You and your friends compare notes the next day at school. Did your candy pass? Did the X-ray tech find anything? I heard someone's jawbreaker had a sewing needle in it. The stories grow more dramatic with every retelling, as urban legends always do. If anything, the X-ray ritual gives everyone a strange kind of peace. Parents relax. Children feel like spies. And hospitals enjoy a rare day of relative calm, no broken arms. Just the world's safest pile of whoppers. Sometimes a tech will find a staple in a popcorn ball or a lost button in a pillowcase, and for a brief moment, you feel like part of a secret society sworn to protect Halloween from itself. The truth? Almost nothing dangerous is ever found. The risk was always tiny. The threat, mostly imaginary. But in a world obsessed with safety, the X-ray machine stands as the final guardian at the gates of Halloween. You can finally relax, knowing your loot is certified by the full weight of modern medicine. So you settle into bed, candy stash secure, knowing no rogue paperclip will threaten your sugar high tonight. Sweet dreams, and don't forget to thank the radiologist on your way out. You might think Halloween was always about fear, but in the 1980s, the real terror wasn't the guy in the rubber monster mask or even your neighbor's haunted garage. It was something much scarier. Your own mother, armed with a suburban arsenal of worst-case scenarios and a stack of stories from the evening news. Somewhere along the way, Halloween became less about tricks and treats and more about a complicated web of urban legends. These stories didn't just float around in the air, they burrowed deep, passed along in hushed tones by parents at the supermarket, teachers at the PTA, and newscasters who seemed personally offended by the idea of uninspected candy. Did you hear? One parent would whisper to another, their voices thick with the excitement of sharing fresh gossip. A boy in Ohio found a sewing needle in his chocolate bar. Someone in Texas bit into a caramel apple and almost lost a tooth on a thumbtack. A girl in Pennsylvania found, well, you don't even want to know. You, of course, never met any of these victims. The stories always happened to someone's cousin's best friend's little brother, and no matter how many times the police, the FDA, or anyone with an ounce of scientific credibility tried to set the record straight, the legends only grew. Like the world's worst game of telephone, the details changed, but the message was always the same. Trust no one. Not even the nice lady 3 houses down who bakes cookies shaped like pumpkins and remembers your birthday. Your mum, once a champion of neighborly goodwill, suddenly developed a sixth sense for danger. If a treat was homemade, it was suspect. If a wrapper was loose, it was tainted. If a candy was off-brand or unfamiliar, it might as well have come from the dark web. Even though the internet wouldn't exist for another decade, she started inspecting your candy with the intensity of a customs officer at an international border. Each fun-sized bar was squeezed, sniffed, and occasionally broken in half, just to check for hidden malice. This ritual took on a theatrical flair. She'd lower her voice and furrow her brow, transforming the living room into a stage for her one-woman show, the Candy Inspector General. Sometimes she'd call your dad over for a second opinion, as if the two of them were seasoned detectives closing in on a major case. "Does this look tampered to you?" she'd ask, holding up a peanut butter cup. Your dad would squint, turn it over, and pronounce, "Better toss it." You never know. Into the trash it would go, another innocent victim of suburban justice. Of course, it wasn't just your house. The entire neighborhood was swept up in a wave of mutual suspicion. Block parties that once featured bobbing for apples and cakewalks now held seminars on safe treats and lists of trusted houses. You weren't allowed to eat anything until you'd returned home, undergone a full inspection, and been cleared by the family tribunal. Half your haul vanished every year. Not to tricksters or ghouls, but to the black hole of parental anxiety. Looking back, you realize nobody actually wanted this. Parents didn't want to spend hours examining tiny boxes of milk duds, and kids certainly didn't want to watch their stash shrink before their eyes. But fear is contagious. and urban legends have a way of worming into the best of us. The world felt a little less neighborly, a little more closed off. That's the true trick of mass hysteria. It trades trust for caution and makes you long for the days when the only thing you had to fear was running out of chocolate before bedtime. So you lay in bed, the faint rustle of wrappers under your pillow, listening to your mum double-check the locks and whisper, "You never know." Because if there's one thing urban legends are good at, it's making sure you never sleep quite as soundly as you did before. You might have gone trick-or-treating in search of candy, adventure, and maybe a harmless scare, but you soon discovered the true monsters weren't lurking in the shadows. They were standing right in your living room, squinting at your loot under a 60-watt bulb. These were your parents, newly transformed by a decade of news broadcasts, neighborhood gossip, and a creeping sense that Halloween was now a high-stakes game of spot the sabotage. Every October 31st, the living room became a crime lab. Your mum would clear off the coffee table, lay out some newspaper like she was preparing for an autopsy, and dump your pillowcase haul into a sticky, Technicolor heap. Your dad, who usually couldn't tell the difference between a Kit Kat and a Twix, suddenly became an expert in wrapper technology and the latest tampering methods. He'd poke, prod, and lecture like a detective on a very special Halloween episode of Dragnet. You watched this transformation with a mix of horror and awe. Your mum, usually the queen of calm, now eyed every chocolate bar with suspicion. She wielded a paring knife with surgical precision, slicing into Snickers, prying open Milky Ways, and peeling back the layers of Reese's Cups, all in search of invisible threats. If she'd put this much effort into making dinner, you'd be eating soufflés every night. Your dad provided color commentary, sharing the latest rumors from work. They say some guy in Nebraska found a staple in his popcorn ball. Never can be too careful. Sometimes your parents roped you into the investigation. "Help us sort the safe candy from the questionable stuff," they'd say, as if you'd passed your forensics exam and were ready to join the force. You'd try to sneak a caramel or two while helping, only to be met with sharp looks. "Not yet. We haven't checked those for needles." Suddenly, you understood why Dracula had trust issues, and the process was never quick. It wasn't enough to glance at each treat and give it the green light. Every piece was scrutinized. Homemade cookies? Gone, even if they came from your best friend's mom. Slightly open wrapper? Out. Brand you'd never heard of? Straight to the trash. If you were lucky, you'd keep about half your stash. If not, you might end up with a depressing pile of wax lips, pennies, and that one unchewable jawbreaker that had been in circulation since 1972. Meanwhile, outside, you could hear the muffled laughter of kids running down the street, the jangle of plastic pumpkins, and the occasional shout of trick or treat. But inside, Halloween was a festival of caution tape and parental paranoia. Your living room smelled like a blend of chocolate, nervous sweat, and Lysol wipes. The more they inspected, the more certain your parents seemed that every treat was hiding something sinister. You started to wonder if they secretly enjoyed the thrill of the hunt, or if this was just their way of reliving the Halloween excitement they'd lost somewhere between paying bills and buying auto insurance. Ironically, for all the anxiety, you knew your parents meant well. Beneath the suspicion was genuine concern, a desire to keep you safe in a world that suddenly seemed dangerous. They weren't trying to ruin your fun. They were just desperate to make sure the worst thing you brought home was a sore stomach from too many Smarties. You'd see the relief on their faces when the job was done. The living room restored to order, the trash can full of rejected treats. As you crawled into bed, a little grumpy and a lot sugared up, you realized that Halloween had become a kind of ritual for everyone. Not just kids on the street, but parents in the kitchen, working late into the night to keep monsters at bay. Maybe that's the real lesson. The scariest things are often just the grown-ups trying their best, armed with a butter knife, a flashlight, and a deep, abiding suspicion of caramel apples. Sleep tight, Candy Crusader. The real monsters are just making sure you get to see another Halloween. If there's one universal truth about Halloween, it's this. At least a third of your candy haul was never destined to see November. Some went to your parents' inspection. Some was quietly bartered away on the school bus. But a sizable chunk landed straight in the trash, sometimes with regret, more often with a sense of relief. The true mystery of your childhood wasn't whether you'd survive Halloween, but what arcane process decided which candies made the cut and which were forever lost to the garbage can of history. Let's start with the easy casualties. Anything homemade? Gone. It didn't matter if it came from your best friend's grandmother or the neighbor who handwrote your name on the wrapper in hearts. Brownies, cookies, popcorn balls, into the bin they went, sentenced for the crime of being unwrapped. You learned to fake gratitude as you received them, clutching your loot bag tightly while knowing deep down this was a doomed treat, destined for landfill before it ever touched your lips. Next up, anything with a wrapper that looked even slightly suspicious. Was that a factory seal or just some tape from Mrs. Jenkins' junk drawer? Did this lollipop have a faint crack in the cellophane? Better not risk it. You'd see your parents holding dubious Tootsie Rolls up to the light, sighing and tossing them with a shake of the head. Safety first, flavor later. If you were feeling bold, you might sneak one from the trash, but even you weren't brave enough to try the orphaned candy corn at the bottom of your haul. Some risks just aren't worth it. And then, the black licorice line. Even if the licorice was professionally wrapped and certified safe by 3 government agencies, you weren't touching it. There was always a pile of black licorice twists and jawbreakers that ended up as a permanent fixture in the family candy bowl. Never eaten, just rotated every year like haunted heirlooms. Ditto for those mysterious peanut butter chews in wax paper, the kind that looked like they were made during the Eisenhower administration and tasted like regret. The same fate awaited anything that smelled off. If your dad opened a mini Milky Way and wrinkled his nose, it was gone. If a Smarties roll had even one loose candy rolling around the wrapper, it was deemed suspicious, evidence perhaps, of tampering by international agents, or just the existential wear and tear of the American trick-or-treat trail. Either way, into the garbage. But not all tosses were based on safety. Some were just matters of taste. You knew, even as a child, that Necco wafers were invented as a dare, and that circus peanuts were punishment for past lives. Even your friends who claimed to like Bitto honey were probably just trying to sound brave. These oddities would gather in the bottom of the bowl, ignored and unloved, until your mum finally swept them away during spring cleaning with the same detachment she used for dead houseplants. Of course, there were rare moments of sacrifice. Sometimes, a truly coveted piece had to go. An unopened caramel, a full-sized Hershey's bar. Just because the wrapper looked loose or a parent had a feeling, you'd watch it disappear, never to be seen again, while quietly mourning your loss and wondering if, somewhere, there was a parallel universe where kids got to eat whatever they wanted and lived to tell the tale. By the end of the inspection, the keepers were few but glorious. Reese's, Snickers, the blessed mini Kit Kats. The rest? Well, Halloween giveth and Halloween taketh away. Your trash can was filled with the detritus of paranoia, taste, and the ruthless logic of 1980s suburban survival. As you drift off, you remember those lost candies with a strange affection. Some you never missed. Some you still crave. But all of them, safe or suspect, are part of the weird, bittersweet ritual of growing up. Sleep tight. Tomorrow, you eat the good stuff. Once upon a time, your neighborhood was a place of comfort, a patchwork of familiar faces and unremarkable lawns, where everyone waved from the driveway and borrowed sugar was always repaid with Tupperware cookies. Then came Halloween in the age of stranger danger, and suddenly, your entire street felt like the opening scene of a true crime documentary. It started with whispers. Maybe you overheard your parents trading hushed rumors by the mailbox, or maybe you caught the tail end of a special report on TV that blurred every friendly neighbor into a shadowy figure behind the curtains. The old rules no longer applied. You used to run up to every house with joyful abandon. Now, every doorbell was a test of courage, and every unfamiliar porch was a potential sting operation. Your parents became amateur detectives overnight. They memorized which houses gave out safe candy last year and which ones handed out suspiciously unbranded bubble gum. They drew mental maps of the neighborhood, circling the homes of trusted friends and putting metaphorical yellow tape across addresses rumored to have once hosted a noisy party or left the recycling out too long. Suddenly, the world outside your front door was divided into two categories: safe and don't even think about it. This shift changed everything. Halloween was no longer just a sugar-fueled sprint. It was a strategic operation. You and your friends were deployed in small squads, walking close together, flashlights in hand. Your parents trailed behind, whispering to each other and keeping a watchful eye on every adult who so much as stepped outside to water the mums. If a porch was dark, you gave it a wide berth. If someone handed out homemade treats, you made a polite thank you and then watched as it was quietly disposed of back home with the efficiency of a covert mission. The phrase "stranger danger" wasn't just a warning. It became an anthem. You heard it on TV, saw it printed on safety flyers at school, and sometimes even sang it in weird, off-key assemblies where you were told never to talk to anyone offering candy out of a van. Every grown-up was a potential suspect. And even the friendliest grandparent could suddenly seem like the villain in a public service announcement. The panic was contagious. Your mum started walking you right up to the door, standing behind you like a bodyguard in case Mr. Jenkins tried anything funny with the popcorn balls. Your dad would watch from the curb, arms crossed, scanning for danger with the same seriousness he brought to mowing the lawn. When a new family moved in, it took years for them to graduate to safe house status. And even then, their candy was inspected twice. At school, the stories multiplied. I heard there's a house where the guy just watches you through the window. Someone on Maple Street gives out pennies because they don't trust kids with sugar. Never eat the candy from the lady with the 20 cats. These warnings took on a life of their own, mixing fact and fiction until you started to wonder if you should just stay home and eat whatever was in the pantry. But deep down, you knew what was really going on. It wasn't that the world had suddenly filled up with villains. It was that fear, once set loose, had a way of turning everything familiar into something strange. Your neighborhood was still the same place it always was. The people behind those doors were still the folks who watered your plants and brought casseroles when someone was sick. But Halloween, once a night of trust and excitement, had become a dress rehearsal for suspicion. As you crawl into bed, safe and a little more wary, you realize you survived another year in the suburban jungle. Stranger danger faded, but the memory of it lingers, another shadow in the neighborhood, watching and waiting for next Halloween. Sleep tight. And don't worry. The only thing under your bed tonight is the leftover candy your parents didn't find. If Halloween had a true villain in the late 20th century, it wasn't the kid with the rubber machete or the suspicious neighbor with a bowl full of loose mints. It was the media. Yes, the same people who brought you Saturday morning cartoons, and the occasional tornado warning turned Halloween into a masterclass in mass hysteria. And they did it the way only TV anchors can. By making you believe that every mini Snickers bar was a ticket to the ER. Every October, the local news shifted into high gear. Halloween safety segments dominated the airwaves. Out came the somber anchors, their voices dropping an octave as they warned about razor blades, needles, and the mysterious threat of poisoned candy. Suddenly, every parent became an honorary member of the FBI. Every child's pillowcase haul was a potential crime scene. It didn't matter that the stories were often just rumors, stretched thinner than the caramel in a Milky Way. If there was even a single incident anywhere in the country, even if it was quickly debunked, it would make headline news, repeated every hour until your mom was calling the police over a loose wrapper. The phrase "better safe than sorry" was repeated so often you started to wonder if the news anchors had shares in the local landfill. The TV coverage always followed the same pattern. Step 1. Send a reporter to the grocery store candy aisle to look sternly at a display of Butterfingers. Step 2. Cut to a police chief explaining that parents should be vigilant. Step 3. Interview a child in a skeleton costume who'd just had their pixie sticks confiscated for testing. By the time they looped the footage for the third time, you were convinced the real horror story was happening right in your living room. Of course, the more dramatic the warning, the better the ratings. Tragedy strikes. After Halloween treat was a lot more exciting than kids enjoy night of candy, fall asleep happy. And so, every October, the fear machine ramped up, fueling the bonfire of parental anxiety. It didn't help that print newspapers and radio joined in, repeating each story until fact and fiction were so tightly wrapped together you couldn't tell them apart. Kind of like a really old Tootsie Roll. And so, parents across the country armed themselves for battle. Candy was X-rayed, cookies were tossed, and any homemade treat was treated like a live grenade. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion, and block parties started featuring safety lectures instead of apple bobbing. Meanwhile, somewhere, a newscaster smiled quietly, knowing they'd just filled another 10 minutes of airtime without having to report on potholes. Kids weren't immune to the fear, either. You'd hear classmates swapping stories that always seemed to happen to someone's cousin's friend's brother in another state. If you managed to keep your full stash of candy, you felt like you'd outwitted not just the monsters, but also the Channel 5 news team. You never looked at a chocolate bar quite the same way again. Still, for all the panic, there was a kind of weird comfort in it too. At least the adults were paying attention. At least your candy haul was the most inspected loot in town. And hey, if the news wanted to spend every October reminding your parents to check your treats, maybe that was just one more Halloween tradition. So tonight, as you settle in under the blankets, remember, sometimes the scariest thing in the room isn't under your bed. It's the voice on the television telling you to be afraid, all for the sake of a little extra ratings sugar. Sleep tight, and may your dreams be commercial-free. The world may have boasted advances in medicine, technology, and even snack food. But when it came to testing Halloween candy for danger, your average 1980s parent went full mad scientist, with about as much accuracy as a dog guessing your password. Forget laboratory-grade equipment or official protocols. The kitchen counter was their lab, the butter knife, their instrument, and intuition their only trusted reagent. It all started the moment you dumped your loot onto the table. Your parents circled the pile like cautious archaeologists unearthing a lost civilization. But instead of careful cataloguing, they dove in with the unshakable confidence of people who'd read one Reader's Digest article and decided they were now food safety experts. First came the visual inspection. Every candy was squinted at, pinched, and turned over for microscopic holes, tears, or suspicious bumps. Anything that didn't look pristine was separated with the same caution you'd use handling a live grenade. Your dad would mutter, "I don't trust the look of this lollipop," and place it in a growing pile of suspects, never to be seen again. Next came the sniff test. Your mum would hold various candies inches from her nose, inhaling like a bloodhound on a hot trail. Did this Tootsie Roll smell like chemicals? Or was that just what Tootsie Rolls always smelled like? Was there an off odor? Or had your mum just reached peak paranoia? You watched as she debated the scent of a fun-size Milky Way as if she were judging wine at a fancy tasting. Earthy, with notes of maybe poisoned peanut. But the most advanced technique of all was the break and examine method. With the precision of a bored high school biology student, your parents would slice open Snickers bars, split peanut butter cups, and even dissect Smarties. You could only watch in horror as they cracked open your favorite treats, searching for telltale signs of sabotage, needles, glass, or the ever-elusive foreign object no one had ever actually seen. The only thing ever discovered? More candy. Occasionally, a crushed peanut, or, once, a hair, probably your own. If anything seemed even remotely weird, out it went. Off-brand candies? Straight to the bin. Homemade fudge? Absolutely not. Unfamiliar flavors? Why risk it? You watched years' worth of loot disappear under the knife, lost to an ever-expanding landfill of just in case. But the real comedy was in the self-confidence. Your dad might announce, "You can never be too careful," right after popping a butterscotch he'd already declared fine for adults. You suspected that the science behind candy inspection was about 10% caution, 20% urban legend, and 70% an excuse for parents to skim the good stuff off the top. Sometimes your parents' friends got involved, comparing methods at school pickup. I use a magnifying glass and rubber gloves. We soak ours in salt water first. Did you hear about the kid who tested his with a magnet and found a razor blade? No one had, but everyone nodded like it was gospel. By the time you finished the ritual, you wondered if maybe you'd have been better off as a 14th century peasant. No candy, but at least fewer trust issues. In the end, most of your candy passed the parental science fair and survived to be eaten, though not before losing some dignity. You learned that the only real safety net was luck and the unwavering suspicion of anyone over the age of 35. So as you nod off tonight, surrounded by your carefully curated candy stash, you can rest easy knowing that, thanks to your parents' highly unscientific tests, the only thing you'll catch from your Halloween haul is a sugar rush and a story to tell for years to come. Sweet dreams, future chemist. Once upon a time, a homemade treat in your Halloween bag was a sign you'd made it. A caramel apple from Mrs. Wilcox, popcorn balls from old Mr. Emery, cookies shaped like ghosts and dusted with orange sugar from someone's grandmother. These were badges of neighborhood honor, proof that you lived somewhere people actually cared enough to bake, wrap, and share. For a moment, the world felt a little bit like a Norman Rockwell painting, and you could imagine your parents once swapped brownies in the glow of streetlights, safe and smiling. But by the 1980s, the warm glow of homemade hospitality was replaced by something colder, suspicion. That popcorn ball was no longer a gift. It was a potential crime scene. A cookie was just a vector for disaster, and anything wrapped in wax paper or plastic wrap might as well have come stamped with a skull and crossbones. Urban legends, news stories, and the relentless march of mass-produced candy turned neighborly kindness into a calculated risk. You knew the moment you dropped a homemade treat in your bucket, it was already living on borrowed time. At home, your mom would single it out for special inspection. Sometimes there'd be a theatrical sigh, a little shake of the head. "You can't be too careful," she'd say, as if Mr. Emery was secretly a Bond villain hiding explosives in Rice Krispies. The treat would sit alone on the counter, a pariah among the shiny Hershey's bars, waiting for its fate. The real heartbreak was the loss of trust. You'd stand there, trying to defend a caramel apple like a lawyer at a sentencing. "But it's from Mrs. Wilcox. She gives me extra when I shovel her driveway. It never worked." "Sorry, honey. That's just the rule now." Into the trash it would go, landing with a heavy thud on top of the popcorn balls, the cookies, the brownies. A whole generation's worth of sugar and sentiment, gone in a single evening, and you weren't alone. Every kid you knew had the same story. At school, you'd swap tales of the weird things your parents made you throw away. Hand-dipped pretzels, chocolate clusters, something called marshmallow haystacks that, honestly, probably deserved it. By mid-November, the local landfill was a graveyard of good intentions and crushed childhood dreams. It got to the point where even the bravest treat makers gave up. Neighborhood legends retired their baking sheets, switching to fun-size candy bars and store-bought lollipops, their recipes gathering dust. Halloween became a procession of shiny, tamper-evident, shrink-wrapped sugar. If anyone dared to hand out homemade treats, they did it with an apologetic smile and a "you don't have to eat it if your mom says no," which she always did. Still, deep down, you missed it. You missed the sense that your street was a place where people looked out for each other, where a treat was a handshake, not a hazard. There was a comfort in the slightly lopsided, sometimes over-baked cookies that no mass-market candy could replicate. A homemade popcorn ball might have tasted like glue, but it also tasted like home. So as you settle into bed, your pillowcase full of regulation-wrapped treats, spare a thought for the lost treasures of Halloween's past. They weren't perfect, and sometimes they were weird, but they were a sign that someone cared enough to make something just for you. In a world full of suspicion, that's the sweetest treat of all. Sleep well, little neighbor. Maybe, just maybe, kindness will make a comeback. There was a time when the fun-sized Milky Way was just that, fun. It was a pocket of caramel and nougat, a tiny, delicious beacon in a sea of waxy candy corn and unchewable jawbreakers. But as Halloween paranoia reached its peak, even the most innocent candy bars became objects of suspicion, none more so than the fun-sized Milky Way. You remember the moment well. The haul was spread out on the kitchen table, a glorious, technicolor sprawl of sugar and hope. Somewhere in the pile sat those small, foil-wrapped rectangles, glimmering like pirate treasure. But suddenly, your mum squinted at them with new intensity, as if expecting them to reveal a dark secret under the kitchen light. "Check every wrapper for pinholes," she'd say, sounding less like a parent and more like an undercover agent in a confectionery sting. That was the era's logic. The smaller the candy, the more likely it was to hide something sinister. The big candy bars seemed safe, if only because, as the rarest of finds, they were obviously above suspicion. But the fun-sized Milky Way, mass-produced and everywhere, could be swapped, tampered with, or otherwise sabotaged by nefarious forces. At least, that was what the local news said last night, right after a segment about a cat stuck in a storm drain. The inspection ritual began. You'd watch as your parents pinched and prodded, holding each Milky Way up to the light, as if waiting for a flash of danger. Did this one feel softer than usual? Into the reject pile. Was that a slight crinkle in the foil? Definitely suspicious. Maybe you'd be allowed to keep one or two, but only after they survived the gauntlet of visual and tactile tests, most of which seemed designed by someone who had never actually eaten a candy bar. Then there was the wrapper test. Your mum would slowly peel back the foil, eyes narrowed. "They resealed these so well now, you can't even tell if it's been opened," she'd mutter. You'd think. Or maybe it hasn't been. Sometimes, she'd break a Milky Way in half, examining the cross-section like a scientist searching for evidence of foul play. The only thing ever found was more caramel. But the ritual persisted. You tried to argue, "But it's the same candy they sell at the store, not good enough." Somehow, the simple fact that it was everywhere made it riskier. "It's just better to be careful," your dad would say, dropping another fun-sized bar in the not-this-year pile. You quietly mourned the loss of that tiny, perfect bite, knowing deep down it was probably safer than the canned soup in your own pantry. Of course, none of your friends were spared. On the playground, you'd swap stories of the Milky Ways that didn't make it, trading tales of strict moms, hyper-vigilant dads, and the one kid whose parents let him eat anything. "He's still alive," you'd whisper, half in awe. Sometimes, you'd sneak a fun-sized Milky Way after bedtime, savoring it like forbidden treasure, a taste of freedom that somehow made the caramel even sweeter. Looking back, it seems absurd that something so small and harmless could inspire such elaborate caution. But that was the world you lived in, a place where fear came in fun, sized packages, and trust was measured in millimeters of foil. So as you drift off to sleep, pillowcase hidden safely under your bed, know that you survived the great Milky Way panic. Sweet dreams, little skeptic. For every generation traumatized by news anchors and X-ray machines, there's always someone, usually your parents or that one neighbor in the velour tracksuit, who insists that things were better back in their day. Halloween used to be simple, they'd proclaim, stirring their instant coffee and shaking their heads at the latest urban legend. We didn't worry about needles in candy. We worried about cavities, and well, mostly cavities. Boomer Halloween nostalgia is its own kind of bedtime story, told in the soft glow of a kitchen nightlight. The tale always starts the same way. Back when I was a kid, suddenly you're transported to a sepia-toned world of crisp autumn leaves and flammable costumes, where the only threat was a rogue popcorn ball getting stuck in your braces. It's a place where kids roamed in packs, unsupervised, and the only thing parents did was remind them to be home by dark. Candy wasn't just a treat, it was a ticket to the dentist's office. No one worried about sabotage or chemical tampering. The only inspection was whether you'd managed to sneak home a second bag without your little brother noticing. The worst-case scenario was a loose tooth, or, if you were really unlucky, a filling that popped out while you were gnawing on a stale bit of honey. Sure, there were still rumors about that one weird neighbor who handed out toothbrushes, but even that was considered more tragic than dangerous. Candy itself was less sophisticated. There were no fun-sized energy chews or pouches of organic fruit snacks. Just a wild grab bag of jawbreakers, bubble gum, wax lips, and rock-hard peanut butter taffy that could double as a construction material. You'd come home with a paper sack overflowing with sugar, and nobody batted an eye if you ate half of it before breakfast the next morning. If you got a stomachache, that was just the price of ambition. Your parents, now the same adults suspiciously dissecting your Kit Kats, swear by the innocence of their own childhood. We never threw away a single piece, they'll say, ignoring the pile of rejected black licorice and stale popcorn balls that even the bravest child wouldn't touch. They talk about trading their candy on the school bus like it was Wall Street, and nobody worried that a roll of Smarties might be laced with doom. The only real panic was when the dentist's office offered to buy back your haul, and you suspected the grown-ups were running some kind of candy cartel on the side. There's a certain comfort in the way they tell it, a longing for a time when trust came easy and sugar was just sugar. It's nostalgia filtered through the lens of selective memory, ignoring the fact that their generation was still dodging rusty playground equipment and chasing ice cream trucks with questionable hygiene standards. But still, you can't help but envy the simplicity. The sense that the scariest thing about Halloween was maybe a neighbor's questionable taste in molasses chews. As you settle into bed, the echoes of their stories blend with your own memories. Maybe it really was easier back then, or maybe every generation just finds new things to worry about. Your teeth will survive, and so will you. And someday, you'll tell your own kids stories about the good old days, when all you had to fear was running out of chocolate before you fell asleep. So sleep tight, future nostalgic. Tomorrow, your only worry is whether there's still a Kit Kat left in your stash. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. If the 1980s taught kids anything, it's that you can never be too safe on Halloween. Forget werewolves, goblins, or even the specter of a dentist lurking in the shadows. The true horror was your mother, armed with a fresh roll of reflective tape and a comprehensive list of new neighborhood rules. Halloween night used to mean freedom, a mad dash through the darkness, costumes flapping, the thrill of evading bedtime in pursuit of a king-sized candy bar. But one year, the grown-ups got together, compared notes, and decided darkness itself was the enemy. Suddenly, everyone you knew was covered in stripes of reflective tape, like tiny, jittery construction workers in plastic Dracula masks. Your costume dreams never stood a chance. You wanted to be a ninja or a vampire, creatures of the night, dressed in darkness and mystery. Instead, your mother stuck reflective stickers to every limb, turning you into a safety-themed disco ball. You begged her to leave the cape untouched, but she insisted, if a car can't see you, you won't get any candy. You ended up as a sort of hybrid, half monster, half traffic cone, and your parents weren't alone. Neighborhood safety became a group project. Parents handed out maps marked with approved houses, like you were embarking on an expedition through uncharted territory. Only go to houses with their porch light on, they warned, as if anyone else was handing out gifts besides cavities and suspicion. Curfews were enforced with military precision. You had to report back by 8 o'clock sharp, or risk being grounded for a year, and possibly turned into a local cautionary tale. Then came the buddy system. You and your friends, once free-roaming agents of chaos, now moved in supervised packs. Each group had a designated adult, flashlight in hand, patrolling the sidewalk like a security detail. If you tried to break off on your own, maybe to double back for a rumored full-sized Hershey bar, you were instantly intercepted. Stay with the group was the mantra, repeated so often it echoed in your dreams. For one magical night, you and your friends became the most supervised people in America. Every year brought new innovations in safety. Parents started handing out glow sticks, as if Halloween was a rave, and you were expected to start dancing in the middle of the crosswalk. If you were really unlucky, you got a reflective safety vest over your costume, effectively smothering any trace of Dracula, robot, or princess. Your dad bought a giant orange plastic pumpkin with your name written on it in marker, just in case the reflective tape failed and someone needed to identify your remains in the bushes. But despite the layers of tape, the glowing accessories, and the endless check-ins, you still managed to have fun. Maybe it was the forbidden thrill of sneaking an extra Snickers from your bucket before inspection. Maybe it was the secret joy of peeling off all the tape when you got home, finally free to be a normal kid instead of a walking traffic hazard. Maybe it was the comforting feeling that, beneath all the fear and planning, your parents just wanted to keep you safe, even if it meant temporarily blinding the neighbors. So as you settle into bed, faintly glowing from residual tape adhesive, remember, sometimes paranoia can be a strange kind of love. Sleep tight, safety star. May all your dreams be filled with unbroken curfews, functioning flashlights, and, just maybe, a costume that actually looks the way you imagined. If you ask anyone who grew up trick-or-treating in the era of parental paranoia, they'll tell you there was only one thing scarier than the stories about poisoned sweets: the tidal wave of advice you got about Halloween candy. Some of it came from grown-ups, some from friends, and some from the collective imagination of kids who had spent a little too much time watching made-for-TV specials about holiday hazards. Either way, the advice stuck with you, sometimes for years, sometimes forever. Let's start with the basics. Don't eat anything unwrapped. This was less advice and more holy law. Even if it looked delicious, even if it was a homemade chocolate chip cookie from the nice grandma next door, if it didn't come in a factory-sealed package, it was banished. Popcorn balls, fudge, caramel apples, all victims of this decree. You could practically hear the ancient voice of parental authority whispering in your ear, if it's not wrapped, it's not worth the risk. Into the trash they went, and into the neighborhood landfill marched the good intentions of a generation. Next, there was don't eat anything that looks tampered with. But what did tampered actually mean? Did it include a slightly squashed Snickers, a roll of Smarties that had lost a candy along the way? Nobody really knew. Your parents just waved their hands and told you to use your best judgment, a terrifying prospect, since your judgment was still developing and largely motivated by sugar. Then came the legends, don't eat anything with a weird smell. Of course, by the third or fourth day, half your candy started to smell like the inside of your pillowcase, which had previously housed a gym sock, 2 Lego bricks, and a lunchbox from 1982. Still, if your dad got a whiff of something funny, that treat was history. You could try to argue, but the parental nose always won. Don't take candy from strangers. This one was confusing because, let's be honest, the whole point of Halloween was taking candy from strangers. Did this only apply to people in vans, people without porch lights, or was everyone outside your immediate family technically a stranger? These were existential questions, rarely answered and never clarified by the advice givers. There was also the practical advice, usually delivered by an older sibling or a friend who'd heard from a guy. Trade all your Smarties for Reese's Cups. Smarties are for babies. Don't eat the black licorice unless you want to die. If you get a toothbrush, egg their house next year. Some of it was helpful, most was nonsense, but it all became gospel at recess. The worst advice, though, was the one about moderation. Don't eat it all at once, or you'll get sick. You tried. Truly you did. But the siren song of a full candy bucket was stronger than any grown-up wisdom. Inevitably, you'd find yourself at midnight, surrounded by wrappers and regret, vowing to listen next year, only to do it all again. In the end, you learned to filter the advice, picking and choosing what made sense and what was just the echo of someone else's fear. You kept the wrapped candy, tossed the weird stuff, and ate the good stuff as fast as you could before anyone changed their mind. So as you fall asleep, stomach aching but spirit unbroken, remember, bad candy is temporary, but bad advice is forever. Sleep well, little skeptic. Tomorrow brings a new batch of opinions, and, with luck, one more Reese's in your stash. One of the strangest things about growing up in the Halloween panic era wasn't just the X-rays or the nightly news warnings. It was the sudden appearance of the Candy Police, a league of concerned adults who took it upon themselves to transform your annual sugar quest into a strictly regulated event. If Halloween used to be a free-for-all, now it was a police procedural, starring everyone you ever met over the age of 30. It started subtly. Neighborhood watch groups, block parents, and safe house programs cropped up on your street, all proudly displaying their window signs like badges. These homes, you were told, were certified safe, oases in a world gone mad with imagined sugar crimes. The grown-ups who ran these operations didn't wear uniforms, but they carried clipboards, flashlights, and the unwavering conviction that they alone stood between you and certain doom. You remember trick-or-treating down the block, glancing nervously at the houses without the safe house pumpkin sign in the window. Your parents, armed with hand-drawn maps and highlighters, steered you away from the unknowns. There were whispered warnings about that one house that never turned on the porch light, or the old man who gave out raisins. He was probably innocent, but in the age of suspicion, even giving out healthy snacks was grounds for a quiet investigation. As the sun set, the grown-ups swung into action. Some patrolled the sidewalks in packs, walkie-talkies at the ready. Others worked from the comfort of their living rooms, peeking through blinds and updating a mental tally of how many kids visited each house. The real pros set up folding tables and candy checkpoints, where kids could have their loot inspected by neighborhood officials before moving on. You didn't know whether to feel protected or targeted. School was no escape either. The PTA started candy buyback programs, offering to exchange your potentially dangerous treats for bland, dentist-approved alternatives. Flyers went home every October listing the rules. Only factory-wrapped candy. No baked goods. No homemade fudge. Anything suspicious should be handed over for immediate disposal, or, as you suspected, for redistribution among the Candy Police's own children. Some neighborhoods went full institution, partnering with the local mall or fire department for supervised trick-or-treating indoors. It felt weird, hunting for candy under fluorescent lights while security guards nodded sternly. You missed the thrill of dark porches and mysterious doorbells, but the adults seemed relieved, chatting in huddles and congratulating themselves for saving Halloween. The candy police weren't all bad, of course. Sometimes they handed out extra treats to anyone who followed the rules, and they always had the best gossip. Still, the air of suspicion changed everything. What used to be an adventure felt more like passing through customs at the airport, bags checked, eyes narrowed, one wrong answer and your stash was gone. And yet, you adapted. You memorized the safe routes. You recited the rules, followed the tape-marked paths, and thanked the candy police for their service. Maybe you even found a little comfort in knowing someone was looking out for you, even if it meant sacrificing a popcorn ball or two. In the end, you always managed to sneak a few contraband treats past the checkpoints, savoring each one as a tiny act of rebellion. So as you drift off to sleep, badge-free and full of sugar, remember, the candy police can take your cookies, but they'll never confiscate your memories. Sleep well, little rule breaker. Tomorrow, the only law you'll need to follow is don't eat it all at once. For all the years of X-rayed candy, flashlight patrols, and news anchors warning you about the dangers lurking in every licorice twist, almost every Halloween scare turned out to be nothing more than rumor or misunderstanding. But then there was that one real case, the story that gave every parent permission to panic. The legend that turned caution into crusade. It was the 1970s. And until then, most people still believed that the worst thing in your treat bag was the possibility of too many root beer barrels. But then, out of Texas, came the chilling tale of the poisoned pixie sticks. The details sounded like the setup to a ghost story. A young boy, a packet of neon sugar, and a terrible outcome. The panic didn't just ripple, it exploded. Here, finally, was proof that the unthinkable could happen, that candy wasn't just dangerous in theory, but in practice. For days, the news couldn't get enough. Experts and child safety advocates paraded across the TV, solemnly shaking their heads. Hospitals offered free X-rays. School newsletters doubled down on warnings. Suddenly, every parent in America was a trained candy detective, inspecting wrappers like their lives depended on it. But what most people didn't remember, or maybe never knew, was that this infamous case wasn't the work of a random neighbor or a candy company gone rogue. It was, heartbreakingly, a crime committed by someone the child knew. The real monster wasn't hiding behind a porch light or a bowl of suspicious apples. It was much closer to home. Yet, the nuance didn't matter. The story had already leapt from fact to folklore, taking on a life of its own in playground whispers and PTA meetings. The fallout was everywhere. Kids who once traded candy with wild abandon suddenly eyed every treat with suspicion. Those rare homemade cookies or apples? Gone, overnight. Your parents started cutting open mini Snickers and shining flashlights into Milk Duds boxes, convinced that danger could hide in caramel or nougat. Entire neighborhoods moved trick-or-treating indoors, to church basements and shopping malls, where the only risk was the stale smell of artificial turf. Even your friends changed. Halloween had always been a free-for-all, a sugar-soaked night of running wild. But now, conversations got more serious. Did you hear what happened in Texas? My mum says someone in our town found a needle last year. Fact and fiction blended until every kid had their own brush with almost danger. Fear was now part of the holiday, the cost of every bite. Of course, it didn't help that every year brought new headlines, each one recycling the same cautionary tale. It didn't matter that real cases were vanishingly rare, or that the vast majority of reports were hoaxes, misunderstandings, or kids playing pranks. All it took was one real tragedy to change the rules forever. And so, the legend of the poisoned pixie sticks became Halloween gospel. Your parents would always check your candy. The news would always run a scare segment. And somewhere, that one true story lived on, growing stranger and scarier with every retelling. So as you drift off to sleep, pillowcase of candy inspected and certified, remember, history sometimes gets rewritten by a single terrible moment. But even legends have their limits. Most Halloweens, the scariest thing you faced was a stomachache and a light scolding for eating your stash too fast. Sleep well, little skeptic. The world is safer and much sweeter than the stories say. If you grew up with siblings, you know that Halloween was never just a battle against neighborhood paranoia or the looming threat of rogue pixie sticks. The real test was making it past your own flesh and blood. The Great Halloween Candy Haul was less a moment of innocent celebration and more a high-stakes game of subterfuge, strategy, and old-fashioned sibling sabotage. You start the night united, canvassing the neighborhood in packs, pooling your resources for greater loot. But the minute you step back inside, the gloves come off. Living room rug becomes the trading floor, your buckets dumped out in a glorious heap. From here, alliances are broken, betrayals are launched, and the true black market economy of childhood is revealed. Older siblings have the upper hand. They've had years to master the art of the trade. They'll offer you 2 premium Bitto honeys for your Reese's cup, knowing full well that Bitto honey is just a jaw workout in disguise. Younger siblings, still new to the game, try to offload Smarties, root beer barrels, or those weird peanut butter taffies that nobody ever asked for. No one trusts anyone, and all debts from previous years are remembered. Remember when you stole my Milky Way last year? This is payback. If you don't pay attention, your entire stash of Snickers could disappear in a single, poorly negotiated deal. Then there's the midnight candy heist. You've done your best, carefully hiding your favorites at the bottom of the plastic pumpkin, maybe even taping the lid shut. But siblings are resourceful, like candy-seeking raccoons. You wake up the next morning to find your prized peanut butter cup missing, replaced with an ancient, rock-hard caramel or, if your sibling is really cruel, a single stale piece of candy corn. You try to confront them, but the rules of Halloween are clear. Possession is 9/10 of the law, and what's gone is gone. Every household had its own rules, none of them enforceable. Maybe you tried to draw a line in the shag carpet. You keep to your side, I'll keep to mine. But candy is a slippery currency, and the true black market emerged at school the next day. At recess, backpacks unzipped in shadowy corners, clandestine deals went down. A single full-sized Snickers could command a king's ransom, 3 packs of Skittles, 2 Twizzlers, and a loose promise to let you borrow my Transformers next week. Nothing was off limits. You'd see candy debts paid off in secret notes slipped into desks. Playground legend had it that one kid even traded a Charleston Chew for a homework pass. And somehow, both sides felt cheated. Sabotage wasn't just about the trade. Siblings would spread disinformation. Mom said those peanut butter cups are dangerous this year, sowing seeds of doubt in the minds of the gullible. Some would take advantage of the parental inspection, volunteering to help only so they could redirect treats to their own stash. It was a world where trust was thin. Strategy was everything, and only the strong and the sneaky survived. But beneath the mischief, there was a kind of rough affection. The trades, the thefts, the whispered late-night exchanges, all of it was part of the Halloween ritual, proof that family life was both a battlefield and a marketplace. You might lose a Snickers today, but there was always next year's rematch. So as you curl up tonight, candy hidden in a new secret spot, remember, you survived not just Halloween's outside dangers, but the trials of sibling rivalry and the wild west of childhood commerce. Sleep well, little negotiator. Your stash is safe, at least until morning. Amid all the candy scares, parental inspections, and neighborhood conspiracy theories, there was one group that came out of the Halloween panic era with a bigger smile and a better bottom line than anyone else: the dentists. For them, October wasn't a month of terror or suspicion. It was the start of the sugar harvest, and business was booming. You might not have noticed it at first. Your dentist was just that nice person in a lab coat who smelled faintly of mint and had way too many pictures of cartoon teeth in the waiting room. But once the leaves started turning and your candy haul was in jeopardy, dentists everywhere transformed from mild-mannered molar mechanics into shadowy masterminds pulling the strings behind the Halloween curtain. The first hint came in the form of the candy buyback program. It sounded innocent. Bring your leftover Halloween loot to the office and exchange it for a toothbrush, a coupon, or, if your dentist was feeling generous, a single silver dollar. The grown-ups acted like this was a public service, a noble cause in the fight against cavities and chaos. But you knew better. You saw the sacks of confiscated Reese's and Snickers piling up behind the front desk and wondered how many dentists' kids were eating better than royalty every November. Then there was the annual lecture. You'd shuffle into your appointment, stomach still recovering from a week of Milky Way breakfasts, only to be greeted with an X-ray, a new set of floss, and a slideshow of what just one caramel could do to an innocent tooth. Your dentist would smile as they pointed at cartoon cavities, then hand you a sticker that said, "I love brushing," as if this could erase the memory of losing half your loot in the buyback scheme. You weren't alone. Every kid at school had their own dentist horror story. There were tales of hygienists with metal tools so sharp they could cut through a Tootsie Roll midair, of fluoride treatments that tasted like regret, and of the infamous cavity-free club where only 3 kids ever made the Wall of Fame. Parents and teachers joined in, waving pamphlets about the dangers of sticky candy, sour candy, hard candy, basically every type of candy that was remotely fun. Of course, it didn't help that the dentists themselves were the only ones smiling through the whole ordeal. They'd pose for newspaper articles, declaring that candy was fine in moderation, then offer helpful hints like, "Just sort your candy and throw away anything too chewy." For a moment, you wondered if they were the secret source of every urban legend, quietly boosting business by making sure everyone was terrified of their own treat stash. Even your parents started using dental threats as leverage. "Do you want another cavity?" became the refrain after every snack. "Maybe we should just give all your candy to Dr. Martinez." You'd nod solemnly, then sneak a fun-sized Kit Kat under your pillow for emergency morale. Still, you had to admire the dentists. In a world where Halloween had become a minefield, they found a way to turn every scare into a teachable moment, and every teachable moment into a full schedule of post-Halloween appointments. Maybe they really did want to keep your teeth safe, or maybe, just maybe, they were the only ones who understood that life is short, candy is delicious, and a little fear only makes the sweet stuff taste better. So, as you brush your teeth, sticky-fingered and satisfied, know this: the dentists may have won, but at least you got the candy first. Sleep well, future cavity survivor. The next appointment is 6 months away. You might have thought Halloween paranoia was a purely American invention, born of local news hysteria and fueled by suburban legend. But as Halloween crept beyond the borders of the US, it brought its anxieties along for the ride. Like a stowaway in a bag of off-brand chocolate coins. Suddenly, candy worry wasn't just your parents' problem. It was a worldwide phenomenon, spreading suspicion faster than a classroom cold. It started slowly, in places where Halloween wasn't even a tradition. British kids, once content with bonfire night and sticky toffee apples, looked across the Atlantic and saw a holiday that combined free candy with costumes, a marketing dream. But along with the fun-sized bars and plastic pumpkins came the warnings: only take wrapped sweets, never eat anything homemade. It was as if the parental anxiety had been packaged and shipped overseas, arriving neatly along with the Reese's and Kit Kats. Before long, countries like Canada, Australia, and Ireland caught the bug. Each nation put its own spin on the fear. In Canada, there were PSAs about foreign objects in sweets, delivered by news anchors in serious sweaters. In Australia, some neighborhoods issued Halloween safety checklists, even though half the population was still trying to figure out what a Tootsie Roll actually was. The Irish, used to telling cautionary tales, embraced the candy inspection ritual with an almost competitive spirit. If you thought your mum was tough, wait until you met an Irish grandmother with a magnifying glass and a sack of suspicious caramels. The phenomenon didn't stop at candy either. Every new country that adopted Halloween seemed to import the full package. Reflective tape, block parents, and a creeping suspicion of anyone offering treats outside a shop. Trick-or-treaters the world over learned to scan their loot with a discerning eye, armed with advice from American TV shows and tales passed down from relatives who once lived in Ohio. The global Halloween experience became an odd blend of delight and dread, equal parts fun and fear. Even international schools got in on the act. Halloween parties in Tokyo or Berlin came with stern warnings from administrators. Do not eat any treat before showing it to a teacher. French children, new to the idea of door-to-door sweets, looked on in horror as their hall was inspected by parents with the same zeal usually reserved for wine corks and cheese labels. For one magical night, it didn't matter where you were from. Everyone was united by a collective anxiety that their Mars bar might be hiding a tiny needle, or that the lollipop from next door was a Trojan horse. Back at home, you and your friends were oddly comforted by the idea that you weren't alone. Kids everywhere were having their treats x-rayed, their popcorn balls binned, and their parents transformed into candy police. You'd hear stories of British kids losing their sherbet lemons to the trash, or Australian children being warned about American candy, as if it were a controlled substance. The spread of candy anxiety proved one thing. Fear, like sugar, is universally appealing, though probably less good for your teeth. The more Halloween spread, the more people wanted to join in, and the more they wanted to make sure their fun didn't come with a side order of disaster. So as you drift off, safe in the knowledge that kids around the globe are also having their loot dissected by loving, overcautious adults, you can rest easy. The world might be full of worry, but it's also full of Snickers. Sleep well. International trick-or-treater. Sweet dreams, wherever you are, and may your candy be inspected, approved, and utterly delicious. If the 1980s were the high water mark of Halloween suspicion, what followed was a slow, halting march back towards something like normalcy. A time when trust was allowed, tentatively, to creep back in alongside the return of full-sized candy bars. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was quieter, more like waking up and realizing you could leave your bedroom door open again, or finding out you could walk to school without your mum following behind with binoculars. The change began in subtle ways. Maybe it was the realization, after years of scare stories and news bulletins, that almost nothing terrible ever happened. Most of the shocking incidents were exposed as hoaxes, pranks, or just a kid with a wild imagination and an upset stomach. The only casualties were the thousands of perfectly innocent popcorn balls and caramel apples tossed out in the name of safety. Parents started to relax a little. At first, they still hovered by the door, flashlight in hand. But you noticed the candy inspections were less aggressive. The knife stayed in the drawer, the scrutiny eased. Instead of dissecting every Milky Way, your mum simply glanced at the wrappers and said, "Looks fine." Even the homemade cookies from Mrs. Wilson were met with a fond sigh and occasionally a cautious nibble. You realized that, given enough time, even the most deeply rooted anxieties can fade, replaced by the simple joy of seeing a child grin over a handful of loot, Neighborhoods, once cordoned off by suspicion, grew friendlier. Parents began to recognize each other at the block party or swap safety tips without the heavy air of paranoia. Maybe someone brought back the tradition of sharing a hot chocolate on the porch, watching costumed kids zigzag across lawns instead of sticking to well-lit, mapped-out routes. Some houses even resurrected the lost art of homemade treats, passing out cookies and brownies with a smile and, sometimes, a little note. Made with love and store-bought ingredients, just in case. Kids noticed the difference too. Halloween returned to its slightly chaotic, joyful roots. The old rules, "Don't eat anything until you get home, let us check it first," became more of a formality than a ritual. Curiosity replaced suspicion. The focus shifted from what could go wrong to how much candy you could haul before your pillowcase ripped. There were still rules, of course. Parents aren't made of stone. But you sensed the mood shift, the balance tip. As trust returned to the trick-or-treat trail, the media moved on too. The news cycle, always hungry for something new, got bored with the same old scare stories. Other anxieties took their place. By the late 90s and 2000s, the Halloween panic was more punchline than public health warning, a quirky artifact of a time when adults honestly believed the Tootsie Pop in your hand might be a weapon of mass destruction. Of course, nobody forgot completely. There was still a moment, every year, when you'd find a treat at the bottom of your bag and hesitate. Is this safe? But for most, the answer, at last, was probably. And so, one cautious bite at a time, sugar and trust made their way back to your neighborhood. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep with the faint taste of chocolate and relief on your tongue, remember, sometimes fear fades and kindness wins, and even the most nervous parent can learn to relax. The world never goes back to exactly the way it was, but it gets sweeter all the same. Sleep well, Candy Kid. Tomorrow, the only thing to worry about is how much you can eat before breakfast. Every year, as October 31st approaches and the air gets crisp, you can feel the old rituals stirring. You dig out the orange plastic pumpkin, the costumes come down from the attic, and the candy aisle in the grocery store transforms into a battleground of nostalgia and temptation. And somewhere, in all that excitement, the voice of caution returns, soft, familiar, and impossible to ignore. "Let me check your candy first," your mum still says, even if you're a full-grown adult sneaking treats from your own kid's bucket. The words are automatic now, woven into the very fabric of Halloween. You don't really expect to find anything dangerous in your mini Snickers, but you check anyway. You slice open a suspicious-looking caramel. You eye the homemade brownie with a mixture of longing and inherited anxiety. The ritual is as much about memory as it is about safety. Why do we still do it? Why, after all the scares have faded and the media has moved on, do parents everywhere pause, examine, and sort? The answer is simple and a little bittersweet. It's what we learned. Fear leaves a mark, especially the kind that masquerades as protection. We absorb the lessons of past panics, razor blades, poisoned pixie sticks, news stories repeated year after year. We grew up believing that caution was the price of fun, that every good thing came with a tiny risk. But there's another reason too. Deep down, the ritual has become a way to connect generations, a passing of the torch, or the flashlight, as it were. Your parents did it for you, just as their parents started doing it for them when the world first got a little more complicated. You'll probably do it for your kids too. Even as you smile at the memory of your own childhood loot dumped on the living room carpet under the flicker of a lamp. Checking candy has evolved from panic into tradition. It's a moment to slow down, to share stories of the great Milky Way toss-out of '85, or the one time your dad swore he found something off about a lollipop and spent an hour dissecting it, only to discover it was just a particularly stubborn piece of candy. It's a reminder of the time your neighbor handed out homemade fudge with a handwritten note, and your mom spent 5 minutes deciding if it was a sign of affection or a secret plot. The story lives on because, in a way, it's comforting. It's a shared memory, a bit of collective absurdity we can all laugh about, even as we dutifully peel the wrapper back from each fun-sized bar. It's reassurance that, despite all the fear and fuss, we made it through. We survived the panic, the lost popcorn balls, and the relentless media coverage. We learned to laugh at our own worries and to appreciate the simple sweetness of a night spent running through the dark in search of treats. And so, every year, the ritual continues. Parents check, kids roll their eyes. Someone remembers the legend of the poisoned pixie sticks. Someone else quietly sneaks an extra Reese's before bedtime. The world, for a moment, feels both a little bit safer and a little bit more ridiculous. As you drift off to sleep, safe in your bed and surrounded by candy wrappers and half-remembered stories, remember, some rituals are worth keeping, not because the danger is real, but because the memories are. Sleep tight, Candy Kid. Tomorrow, you get to tell the story all over again. You thought you'd made it. You'd braved the cold, worn your costume until it frayed, navigated dark driveways, survived the parental inspection, and finally stashed your precious haul under the bed for midnight snacking. But just as you settle in, satisfied and smug, a new adversary emerges. Not in the form of a lurking stranger or rogue pixie sticks, but in your own home. Enter the candy buyback program. At first, it sounds almost generous. Turn in your candy, and we'll give you money, your parents announce, as if they're running a miniature Wall Street, and you're the CEO of Chocolate Incorporated. For every pound you hand over, there's a crisp dollar bill waiting. Or, more likely, a Ziploc bag of baby carrots. You're not sure whether to be insulted or impressed. Either way, the game has changed. The pitch is simple. Fewer cavities, less hyperactivity, and, if your parents are truly ambitious, a lesson in fiscal responsibility. You're supposed to weigh your stash, do some quick math, and make an informed decision. How much is a Reese's really worth to you? Your mum asks, not so subtly holding a $5 bill hostage over the compost bin. There's a catch, of course. The buyback rate is a joke. You do the math and realize you're trading 2 Butterfingers and a whole roll of Smarties for less than the price of a pack of gum. Meanwhile, the real winners are your parents, who now have a convenient excuse to reduce your sugar intake and quietly skim off the good stuff under the guise of dental health. Some kids take the bait, imagining what they'll buy with their Halloween earnings. A new toy, maybe, or the first installment of a fund that will someday buy a second-hand Game Boy. Others, more skeptical, start negotiating, offering up the least desirable items in hopes of keeping the chocolate. I'll give you all the licorice and 3 circus peanuts for a quarter. Your parents pretend to consider, but everyone knows the carrots are coming for you anyway. If you're unlucky, your dentist is in on the scheme. Flyers come home from school. Turn in your Halloween candy at Dr. Gomez's office. Receive a prize and help troops overseas. You picture a platoon of soldiers opening a care package, only to discover the international surplus of orange taffy and off-brand mints. Maybe even the military deserves a little suffering too. No matter how the deal is pitched, it's clear this isn't just about candy. It's about control. For your parents, the buyback is a tool, a way to feel like they're fighting back against big sugar and the ghosts of their own dental bills. For you, it's the moment you first understand the weird calculus of adulthood, where everything fun has a hidden price and every negotiation ends with a vegetable. Still, you play along. Maybe you even pocket a few bucks, learning that sometimes it pays to let go. Maybe you stash your favorites deeper under the bed, knowing there's a raid coming at sunrise. Maybe you realize that, like all Halloween rituals, The buyback program is just another way of saying, I care, albeit with a little financial pressure and a suspiciously empty candy bowl. So as you settle into bed, counting your coins and eyeing your dwindling stash, remember, bribery, when done right, is just another word for parenting. Sleep well, little entrepreneur. Tomorrow, your investments will pay off in chocolate, carrots, or maybe just in the sweet satisfaction of a game well played. There was a time, not so long ago, when every Halloween haul included a few mysterious packages. A twisted cellophane bundle, a wax paper twist, a homemade goodie wrapped in the kind of sandwich bag your mum used for bologna lunches. These were the unmarked treat bags, cryptic, unbranded, a little suspicious, and, for one shining moment, the most intriguing items in your loot. Back in the before times, getting an unmarked treat was a sign that someone in the neighborhood had gone above and beyond. Maybe it was a caramel apple from Mrs. Patterson wrapped in cling film and tied with yarn. Maybe it was a handful of peanut butter cookies, still warm from the oven, or a cellophane cone of popcorn, sealed with Scotch tape and neighborly optimism. You'd look at these bundles and think, this is the good stuff, the kind you couldn't buy at the store, made by real people with real kitchens, and, apparently, a deep trust in the immune systems of children. Unmarked treat bags had their own mythology. Each one promised a mystery. Would this be the legendary fudge that melted in your mouth? Or the infamous popcorn ball that cracked your molar? They were a culinary gamble, and as a child, you relished the uncertainty. Opening one felt like being handed a treasure map. Sometimes it led to gold, sometimes to raisins, but always to adventure. But as the years rolled on, something changed. The first warnings came on the news. Then from the principal at school. Only eat candy that's sealed and branded. Suddenly, the once coveted unmarked treat bags became the Halloween equivalent of contraband. Your parents eyed every homemade bundle with suspicion, poking at cookies with a fork, unwrapping popcorn with surgical gloves, as if the next neighborhood bake sale might be front-page news. The decline was swift and merciless. The annual post-Halloween inspection now had a first step. Separate out anything homemade. Those unmarked bags landed in the trash without so much as a taste, casualties of the new gospel of safety. All the love and effort poured into them evaporated with a parental sigh and a shake of the head. It's a shame, really, your mum would say, tossing out Mrs. Patterson's caramel apple. But you just can't be too careful these days. The message was clear. Trust was out. Shrink, wrapped, was in. You noticed the shift in the neighborhood too. Once enthusiastic treat makers traded spatulas for fun-size candy bars. The last holdouts, stubborn or optimistic, still pressed their bags into your hand with a wink. Don't tell your mom, they'd say, half joking, half pleading for a return to the days of community trust. But the world had moved on, and your parents weren't budging. At school, you and your friends mourned the lost treasures. Who knew what sweets had slipped through your fingers, what legendary cookies you'd never taste? Some claimed to have eaten a forbidden brownie in secret, their bravery the stuff of playground legend. I ate one and survived, a classmate would whisper, eyes wide. Maybe you believed them, maybe you didn't. It hardly mattered. The unmarked treat bag was history. Still, a part of you missed them, the weird shapes, the handwritten notes, the idea that someone had thought about you for more than 3 seconds in the candy aisle. You realized Halloween was never just about the sugar, but about the trust those little bags represented. So tonight, as you sort through your factory-wrapped loot, spare a thought for the unmarked treats of yesteryear. Sleep well, little adventurer. In your dreams, there are still treasures wrapped in wax paper, and every mystery is a treat waiting to be unwrapped. Halloween is supposed to be about the kids, but during the peak candy panic years, every grown-up on your block discovered their hidden talent. candy analysis. It didn't matter if they couldn't tell a Shiraz from a Cabernet, or if the fanciest thing they'd ever tasted was a root beer float at the state fair. Come October 31st, every adult became a self-appointed candy sommelier, ready to examine, critique, and ultimately judge your hard-earned loot with the seriousness of a Michelin star food critic. The performance began as soon as you dumped your pillowcase onto the living room rug. Like master sommeliers, your parents would swirl, sniff, and inspect each piece of candy, holding it up to the light and examining it for clarity, color, and suspicious notes. Was the wrapper glossy enough? Did it have that signature snap when twisted? "This Smarties roll looks off," your mum would murmur, eyes narrowing as if detecting a rare vintage gone bad. Next came the aroma phase. You'd watch as your mom inhaled deeply over a fun-sized Snickers, pausing like she was picking up hints of autumn or danger. She'd pass questionable specimens to your dad, who might nod solemnly and add, "There's an undertone of chemical here." He'd then crack open a milk dud, sniff it, and hand it back, declaring, "This one's corked." You didn't know what that meant, but it sounded final. They'd slice into Reese's cups, break Kit Kats in half, and examine the cross-sections like they were evaluating marbled beef. "Do you see this white film?" your mum would whisper, pointing to a perfectly normal candy bar. "That's not supposed to be there." You'd find yourself defending your candy like a proud chef. "It's just the chocolate settling, Mom." But logic was powerless against the mighty palate of a Halloween parent. It didn't stop with your family either. Neighborhood adults joined the critique. At post-trick-or-treating gatherings, your parents and their friends would cluster together, swapping tips on what to look for. Avoid anything with a faded wrapper. If it rattles, throw it out. Always check the peanut butter cups for leaks. It became an unspoken contest to see who could be the most discerning, the most safety-conscious, the true master of the sweet grape. Sometimes, you'd catch a neighbor pulling a mini Three Musketeers from her child's haul, sniffing it and offering tasting notes. Hints of nougat, but with a finish of artificial anxiety. The kids, meanwhile, looked on in dismay as another favorite treat vanished under the weight of grown-up judgment. Halloween became a night of tasting flights, except every flight ended with someone saying, "Better safe than sorry." Of course, this new tradition wasn't all bad. Occasionally, your parents would confiscate a piece of candy for further testing, only to enjoy it themselves in the kitchen later, eyes sparkling with conspiracy. Sometimes, a favorite treat would pass the sommelier gauntlet, and the victory felt sweeter than any ordinary night. Looking back, you realize the grown-ups were just doing their best, trying to keep you safe in a world that suddenly seemed full of hidden risks. Maybe they overdid it, but beneath all the swirling and sniffing was the oldest flavor of all: love, with a long finish of worry. So, as you drift off tonight, pillowcase tucked safely away, remember, every Halloween, your candy wasn't just tasted, it was cherished, inspected, and, in its own absurd way, celebrated. Sleep well, little connoisseur. May your dreams be sweet, and your next Milky Way pass the test with flying colors. Once upon a time, Halloween meant freedom, darting between houses under a moonlit sky, costumed and caffeinated, hunting for treats like candy-fueled wolves. But after a few years of panic and neighborhood meetings, something new swept the suburbs: the organized Halloween party. Suddenly, your trick-or-treat marathon became a carefully planned affair, held indoors, with all the thrill and half the mystery. It started with a flyer taped to the school doors. Join us for a safe, fun, candy-filled Halloween party in the church basement. The promise was simple. You'd get all the treats you could carry, plus games, punch, and crucially, the constant presence of adult supervision. Parents everywhere sighed in relief. No more prowling the streets, no more checking the porch lights for hidden dangers. Inside, everything was brightly lit and certified worry-free. You arrived, squinting under the fluorescent lights, your cape or wings drooping slightly. The decorations were earnest: orange streamers, grinning jack-o'-lanterns, a big felt bat taped to a window. Buckets and bowls of individually wrapped candy lined every table. It was as if the National Safety Council had hosted a sugar sale. And everyone was invited. The old ways, dark, chilly, a little risky, were replaced by order and abundance. There were games, too. Pin the tail on the ghost. Bobbing for apples, with stern warnings about no swallowing. A cakewalk with cupcakes so thoroughly shrink-wrapped, you wondered if they'd survived a tornado drill before making it to the table. Your costume was admired, but only after your mom taped a name tag to your back and checked that you could move safely in the crowded fellowship hall. Instead of sprinting through the neighborhood, you circled the bingo tables, bag in hand, like a polite pirate at a candy convention. The candy hall was generous, if predictable. No more homemade treats or unmarked popcorn balls, just industrial strength, brand name loot, pre-approved by committees of cautious grown-ups. If you ran out of energy or steam from your dinosaur costume, there was punch, watered down to healthy levels, and a snack table covered in carrot sticks and cheese cubes just in case. At least there was always enough candy corn for everyone, though, as usual. Only 3 kids ever actually ate it. Parents mingled along the walls, sipping coffee and trading stories of Halloween's past. "Remember when we used to go door to door?" one would ask. A little wistful. Another would nod, watching the kids bob for apples with the intensity of Olympic judges. "Safer this way," they'd say, glancing at the emergency exits. You missed the chaos a little. The thrill of not knowing if the next house would offer full-sized Snickers or a handful of pennies. But you adapted. You learned to make trades at the punch bowl, to sneak extra sweets when the adults weren't looking, to turn every round of musical chairs into a mad dash for bonus treats. In time, the Halloween party became its own tradition. You'd look forward to it, seeing all your friends playing silly games and walking out with a bucket so heavy you needed help carrying it to the car. There was something cozy in the routine. The sense that even if the world was full of invisible dangers, there would always be a safe, fluorescent-lit corner where sugar reigned supreme. So as you drift off tonight, eyelids heavy with sugar and memory, remember, the safest parties are the ones where everyone's invited and nobody leaves without a treat. Sleep well, little reveler. Tomorrow you can return to the wild. But tonight you're safe and your candy is counted, wrapped and waiting. Decades have passed since your first Halloween candy inspection, but some lessons, like the one about never take the top slice of bread, are hardwired forever. Long after you stopped trick-or-treating, you find yourself hesitating before tearing open a treat, haunted not by ghosts or goblins, but by the deep-seated paranoia planted in your childhood. Welcome to the era of adult snack anxiety, the long-term trauma that keeps you quietly checking your snacks, one mini Snickers at a time. It starts innocently enough. Maybe you're at the office, standing in front of the communal snack bowl. Someone offers you a homemade cookie. You smile, thank them, and then pause. You turn the cookie over, scan for cracks, sniff for any off aroma, and, just for a second, wonder if you should call your mum for a consult. You can still hear her voice. If it's not wrapped, you probably shouldn't eat it. The advice runs on a loop, like a public service announcement in your head. Even factory-sealed snacks aren't immune. You twist the cap off a granola bar and eye the wrapper for suspicious tears. Was that always there? Or did something happen on the way from the vending machine? You remember the old ritual. Hold it up to the light, check for pinholes, give it a gentle squeeze to make sure nothing's rattling inside. Co-workers glance your way, but you're unfazed. Trust, like your metabolism, has slowed with age. The supermarket is a minefield. You scan the bakery display, marveling at the scones and muffins, and then reach, instinctively, for the ones encased in plastic. Safety first, you mutter, ignoring the little voice inside that says, they taste better when they're fresh. At parties, you artfully avoid the homemade cheese ball and hover near the individually wrapped candies just in case. Your friends laugh, but you shrug. You survived the great candy panic of the late 20th century. You'll take your chances with the Kit Kat. Your anxiety isn't just about physical safety. It's the lingering effect of growing up in a world where everyone's mum was an amateur forensics expert. Every suspicious snack is a trigger for ancient caution. Was there a scare about granola bars last year? You can't remember, but it feels safer to check anyway. You replay urban legends in your head. Stories about that one kid who ate a tampered treat and never came back to school, even though you know most of it was rumor. Your inner 6-year-old still sorts snacks like they might be evidence. Sometimes, you think about what you've lost. The days when you dive into a popcorn ball without a second thought. When trust came wrapped in wax paper and tied with a smile. You miss the care packages from your neighbor, the brownies at the potluck, the mystery candies passed around at recess. You wish the world felt a little safer, a little less shrink-wrapped, but old habits die hard. You teach your kids to check their Halloween loot, and you don't eat the unwrapped mints at the restaurant. It's not quite fear anymore, just a cautious respect for history, and a touch of nostalgia for the days when danger looked like a fun-sized Milky Way. So as you drift off tonight, your midnight snacks safely inspected and your mind at ease, know this. You're not alone. The world is full of grown-up candy checkers, quietly honoring the lessons of their youth. Sleep well, lifelong skeptic. Tomorrow, the office candy bowl will still be there, and you'll be ready. And so, as you drift off tonight, remember, you survived the age of candy hysteria. You braved the long, cold nights in a costume made of flammable plastic, dodged your neighbor's suspicious apples, and lived through every news anchor warning that your mini Snickers might contain a weapon of mass confection. You endured parents who dissected your loot like forensic scientists, siblings who swapped your chocolate for disappointment, and dentists who turned your sugar rush into a business model. Yet, despite the panic, you made it. Your generation faced the razor blade in the Apple legend, the poisoned pixie sticks rumor, and a nationwide case of sweet-toothed mass hysteria, and you came out the other side with a handful of safe, slightly melted peanut butter cups and a lifetime of stories to tell at Halloween parties. Somehow, you learned that most of those terrifying tales were just that. Tales. That trust, like a full-sized candy bar, is rare but worth savoring. And that a little fear is sometimes just the price of a good story. So tonight, as you tuck into your warm, candy-free bed, hopefully free of Smarties and definitely free of suspicious apples, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to your childhood self, the one who faced every October 31st with excitement, a little dread, and a pillowcase full of hope. Maybe even spare a smile for your parents, who just wanted you to be safe, even if they did ruin a perfectly good popcorn ball in the process. Because history is sticky, and sometimes ridiculous, but it's proof that people will always find a way to keep going, even if it means inspecting every fun-sized treat under fluorescent light. Life, like Halloween candy, is unpredictable, a little bit absurd, and surprisingly sweet when you get past the wrapper. Sleep well, and remember, you've already survived the scariest Halloween of all. Good night.